She was in a pool of blood when my investigator went in the apartment, and Bundy was leaving out the back window.
In 2018, we interviewed the sheriff that caught one of America's most evil serial killers, Ted Bundy.
This case may have been predestined because, here the most educated serial killer to come down the pike came to the only town with the most educated sheriff. But he would taunt me with Ken, as he would refer to me, with that sarcastic twist of that name. Just 3 letters, but he would say, Ken, the evidence is there. You just can't find it.
He appeared to be the perfect all-American man. Good-looking, fun, charming, and irresistible to women.
He didn't come across as evil. He came across as brilliant, charismatic, smart, insightful, and he was a good communicator. You put together the evil with all of those positive traits, and you have a very dangerous person.
Bundy kidnapped, raped, and murdered numerous women and girls across large swathes of America.
We had a very deliberate double bite impression. Double meaning he bit down and then he came out and bit again. And he didn't want to bite through. He just wanted to viciously bruise. That was his signature.
He confessed to 30 killings, but the real figure is likely much higher, with many bodies never being found.
He loved to confuse the police. Pick up a woman in one jurisdiction, murder her in another, bury her in another, because he thought the police can't put it together. And to some degree, at the time, he was right.
Tallahassee, Florida, January 15th, 1978. Just after 2:30 a.m., Leon County Sheriff Ken Katsaris received a phone call from his sheriff's dispatch room. They had what looked like 4 murders at the Chi Omega sorority house on Jefferson Street.
Ken Katsaris, now former sheriff of Leon County, Florida, that's the state capital. Well, I got the call, obviously, and was in disbelief. They told me the address, and it was the sorority house at FSU, that they told me there may be 4 dead girls. I mean, this is unheard of. Quiet Tallahassee with the university, happiness, education going on, people partying, but we didn't have that. I didn't process all of that. I drove there and my mind was just reeling with thoughts of what could this be. When I got there, I did check with the investigators who had been inside. They had secured the scene. We knew that we had 2 who were obviously dead, and 2 that they believed may die, but they were transported. In the moments that it took me to get there, they were carrying out the second one and putting her into the ambulance at the time. Didn't know whether they would survive or not. Obviously, it was surreal for me because, yes, obviously I was used to working on murder cases. So it's not like I was having my first experience by any means, because I had worked many murders and other violent crimes prior in a much larger jurisdiction. But here, it was much quieter, a university town. It just I wasn't processing that very well in terms of, what could have happened? Who could have done this?
Sorority sisters, 21-year-old Margaret Bowman and 20-year-old Lisa Levy, had been murdered.
I immediately formed a major crime squad. I knew that one agency shouldn't be, doing it all. So I put together a major crime squad on the scene. I told my captain of detectives, Captain Jack Pottinger, I said, Jack, put together a major crime squad made up of the Leon County Sheriff's Office, the Tallahassee Police Department, the Florida State University Campus Police, the Florida Highway Patrol. It's our state investigative agency at the time. We want all of the minds together. We'll lead it. But we want all of us to be able to meet, and we want total coordination on this. I knew there was something different and special about what had occurred. I just hadn't processed what yet, but I knew at the time. I did not walk into the crime scene. I wanted to make certain that it was as preserved as possible. I didn't want to introduce my foot impressions. I didn't want to introduce any evidence. I didn't want to drop a hair. I wanted everybody sealed and out of that location. Obviously, I was teaching advanced forensics, and I knew that I shouldn't be walking around examining the crime scene, because at that moment, I wasn't going to contribute anything. It would have just been my curiosity. And curiosity can be a dangerous thing when you're not going to contribute. But I did take over and direct everything that occurred. Then, as I'm standing outside of the sorority house, we get a call that there's strange noises coming from a condo next door. And I sent an investigator immediately, because I said, 6 blocks away, could it be? Could it be the same person? And it was. And he had brutally beaten a dance major from Florida State University. Well, we indeed, of course, had a meeting of the administrators that morning. What's really interesting, and I don't think many know, is that I got a phone call in my car. There were limited telephones in automobiles at the time, but I had one. The governor of the state of Florida and I shared a telephone frequency, so that when I needed to use the phone and the governor was using it, I had to excuse him and tell him that I had an emergency. But I got a phone call as I was near the university, as I was just leaving the scene, and it was from Utah. And they told me that they had an escaped prisoner that had been known to kill women. And just in case it means anything, this guy's name is Ted Bundy. And of course, I'm making a note, Ted Bundy. And I said, well, Utah, okay. He escaped from Colorado because he was being held in a jail there for purposes of investigating a murder in that location, but he was sentenced to the Utah State Prison. And I said, well, what's the chance? What's the chance? But of course, there was nothing that the name would direct us to. We knew he was escaped. Where he was, what's the chance that he made his way to Tallahassee and did this? But it was the first name associated with the investigation. But of course, there was nothing to run down. There was nothing to do other than, we were already looking for him. He was an escaped prisoner. He was serving 15 years for abduction. So that was the next thing that struck my mind that I've never forgotten. Obviously, as I go back and say, wow, what a needle in a haystack situation that the first name is also the individual. Then, of course, we move forward to where an officer just doing good law enforcement work in Pensacola with Escambia County, that's the county where Pensacola, Florida is located, stopped him in a Volkswagen. And it's because he was going slow and he just had a gut feeling that something might be wrong. And of course, it came out over his radio after he called it in that the vehicle had been stolen, and it was stolen from nearby the Chi Omega house, which is the sorority where this occurred. All of that started to could it be? And it was. And of course, he was captured and kept there. I started directing now my investigators to go there and start interviewing him. The first name he gave was not his. He had a stolen driver's license with a picture that, could have been him. So he was using that. And the name happened to be one of our standouts at Florida State University, who was a known swimming standout, an athlete. And that person wasn't missing, but he was missing his driver's license. So We knew now that that was not the proper identification. That even piqued our curiosity more. So my investigators went, started talking to him, and now he got really weird on us. Now he was messing with us, messing with the law enforcement officers, messing with their mind. He knew that he wanted to trip them up. So he said, I'll talk to you, but I won't talk to you unless it's around midnight. And I want to be near a window. I want to be able to see the full moon. Okay, now, obviously he didn't need any of that. This was his way of creating his drama over his arrest. And now he wanted to get into the minds of the individuals he's working with, confuse them. I let that go on for a little while, not long. I told my investigators, this is over. This is over. We're playing his game. We're not going to play his game anymore. It's over. He's coming back to Tallahassee. He will be in our custody, and we will talk about when we talk to him. We will say where he's going to be interviewed, and we will control the interview. Right now, he's messing with us.
3 other women violently attacked by Ted Bundy that morning survived.
They were awake. They were waking up and didn't know what was going on. Obviously, prayerfully, they survived. The 3rd one at the different location survived. But I don't know if there's another case. I'm not going to say there isn't. I don't know of another case where you're at the scene working multiple murders and injuries like he inflicted, to get a call while you're there that down the street, 6 blocks away, he's doing it again, which only tells you he couldn't help himself. These moments were absolutely driving him. He was driven. At that moment, he was like that shark that is just going for the prey, one after the other, and he couldn't stop. Perhaps he couldn't stop himself. I'm not excusing him by any means. I'm assessing that in his mind, he was committed to killing. And he had to kill and kill and kill until it was all out of him. I'm sure he laid down just spent after that. And then I think he probably got up and simply savored it. I met him at the vehicle that was bringing him into what we call a sally port. That's the enclosed area of the outside of the jail where prisoners are driven in, secured by locked gates behind the vehicle into a secured facility where we then took them out of the car. I opened the door of the vehicle and escorted him out of the car, took him by the arm and pulled him out, and we had our first face-to-face. Now, I was in a suit. He looked at me, and whether he had done research on this area because he chose to be here, he had been here for 2 weeks. I was in the news periodically as the sheriff. He may have seen me. Possibly he knew who I was that night, but I'm not sure. But the way he looked at me, the way his eyes drilled through me, not at me, through me, I knew that he was starting his assessment. Who is this guy? How am I going to take advantage of him? What am I going to do? And it was from there that we began I don't want to call it a relationship because I don't want to have a relationship with Ted Bundy, but we had a very special and different connection that arose out of that moment where I think he knew he had met a challenge, because I was dead serious. When I viewed the two bodies of the young ladies at the morgue on the slab, just barely 20 years of age, I had a 1-month-old little girl at home, my daughter, and I had a 2-year-old daughter at home, and I just kept flashing images that this could be them. I made myself a promise in the morgue. Somebody's going to pay for this. Now, I was driven. I think that helped because it took a total commitment. I probably didn't make friends in law enforcement as a result of this commitment because they weren't used to one person taking charge and directing other agencies. But that's what the Major Crime Squad was all about. In other words, I thought I could direct it with their cooperation and involvement. I didn't boot them out, I brought them in. But I knew that one person had to filter everything or we were going to lose something. We had a very deliberate double bite impression. Double meaning he bit down and then he came out and bit again. And he didn't want to bite through. He just wanted to viciously bruise. That was his signature. And it was so interesting because I believed that at the time. I was teaching the forensics of homicide investigation, and I was teaching the advanced concepts. So I knew that these bite marks were going to be important, even though they had never been introduced in the court before. But he used to taunt me when I would talk to him in jail. And I talked a lot to him because I didn't want him out of his cell unless I was present. Under extraordinary circumstances, that would happen. But I would make certain that the cautions were there that he wasn't going to escape, because he did escape from other places. But he would taunt me with Ken, as he would refer to me, with that sarcastic twist of that name. Just 3 letters, but he would say, Ken. And then he would say, the evidence is there. You just can't find it. Even though he wasn't admitting that he was part of it, he was just telling me that he knew enough about what others would do that the evidence is there. And I thought then, I know what he's referring to. He signed one of those bodies. Now, he did mutilate the other with his teeth, but I think he couldn't sign that one because he got tied up into the viciousness of what he was doing. This is the only time we had bodies that would reflect it, because this was a totally different murder case for him. Inside a house and left as they were, because he would typically abduct and take away and bury somewhere in a different jurisdiction. He loved to confuse the police. Pick up a woman in one jurisdiction, murder her in another, bury her in another, because he thought the police can't put it together. And to some degree, at the time, he was right. We weren't coordinating like we do today. Now, I focused on the bite marks because I knew they had potential, but they weren't used in court at the time. I had to figure a way to first preserve them. I worked with medical staff at the hospital, forensic individuals. I talked to a forensic odontologist about them. But then I knew I needed an exemplar. I needed his teeth marks. And that became I think it consumed me. How can I get them? We tried everything in terms of, we knew that if we gave him an apple, for example, and he bit into it and left the core, we may have some impression, some bite that could be compared. It was interesting because he talked to the inmate in the cell next to him through a little vent. And he said, I wonder why they keep giving me different kinds of fruit. We gave him different kinds of fruit because we weren't sure which one, the core, would leave the best bite impression. And that inmate said, you're getting fruit? I don't get any fruit. And I think he became suspicious that something was going on with that because he quit eating his fruit. Governor Askew, who was the governor at the time, worked very closely with me. I went to his church on a Sunday morning after the crimes occurred. I waited for him outside. I said, Governor, I need your help. He put his arm around me and he said, Sheriff, what do you need? I said, I need you to just simply clear the way for me with the state lab. When I need something, I want you to help me get what I need. And he said, you just tell me what you need, I'll take care of it. So I was laying the groundwork politically, scientifically, legally, looking at how to do this. And then it struck us. It hit. What about a search warrant for his mouth? Well, no one had ever gotten a search warrant for somebody's mouth, but I thought, I teach search warrants. If we got a search warrant, we wouldn't have to tell him. We can just go serve it. That would get the bite impression. So I got Richard Souveron on board, who was the forensic odontologist, Dr. Souveron, out of Coral Gables, Florida. And I got my dentist on board, Emery Kane. I got my physician involved, and I determined now we're going to bring him to my dental office. And I personally went to Ted Bundy's cell and I said, and it was nighttime, I said, you're coming with me. All of a sudden, he had this fear that maybe I'd had my limit, I was going to take him out and perhaps eliminate him on my own. Of course, I would never do that. Justice served that way is improper justice. Obviously, I would be no better than him. But he wasn't sure. This was different. My attitude was different. He could tell. He was reluctant to come out of his cell. I told him to put his brace on. I had a special brace developed, now called the Bundy brace, that it took the place of having to worry about handcuffs because it didn't allow him to run. It locked in place and kept his legs stiff. And it was the first time a brace like this had ever been used in the country. It was spring-loaded so that when he would straighten out his leg, you could hear that spring pop into place, and it was locked. And, he couldn't take it off because it had a lock on it. And that way, if he tried to run, he'd be running with one stiff leg. I told him to put his brace on. He didn't want to, so he got out. He came with me. As we're entering the dental office from the back door, he starts laughing. And I said, "What's so funny?" He said, "I know why we're here." I said, "Why?" I didn't realize it, but there was a line of photographs up the stairway. And he thought that I brought him to a photography studio. He said, "You don't have a camera good enough to capture my image. You want a good picture of me." I said, "Oh yes, I want a good picture of you." And I escorted him up the stairway because he couldn't walk it very well with the brace. And then the door opened, and there sat three men with little white smocks on and the dental chair behind them. And he knew that was the moment. that he came to grips with the signature. That's when I realized, yes, I was right. He started screaming for his attorney. He was shouting a name. He had 18 attorneys over a period of time. So it was one of those times when he actually had an attorney, because he felt he was his own attorney. He was the best attorney for him because he thought he knew better than anyone else. He had 2 years of law school. So he felt like, I know. He had a degree in criminology, a minor in psychology. So now he's screaming for his attorney, just like he knew exactly what we were going to do. And then I told him, we're going to take a bite impression. And he said, you can't do that. And I said, I have a warrant. And I started reading the warrant. We read through the warrant for his mouth. And I had the judge put in there that we could use any and all force reasonably necessary to retrieve any evidence that is associated with this case from his mouth. And I showed him the contraptions that they use post-mortem to keep the mouth open when they have to do dental work, because they had brought those along. Dr. Suberon had those. And he looked at me. He sat down in the dental chair, smiled, and said, Ken, you know I'm not a violent person. Do what you need to do. He really changed his whole personality after this. He had been through a lot and was on his best game, as I would call it, I guess, of challenging and dealing with law enforcement. He loved the game. It was like he was playing chess with real bodies. It's like, he was making those moves that satisfied his core internal needs. And that's what we could never understand, is how as some called him, and I don't know, some called him handsome. Now, he could be. It seems like he could change his looks a lot. And he did, because when you look at a series of different pictures of him at different times, he really does look a lot different. He felt like he was a chameleon, in that he could disguise himself, he could change his colors, and he could take advantage, and he could strike like a chameleon, bam, and take his prey. And it gave him such satisfaction, apparently. At least that's what I saw. All that seemed to disappear after the bite mark. It's like his signature now that he kept taunting me with. The evidence is there, Ken, you just couldn't find it. We never had a discussion about it, and I didn't care to, nor did I want to. But I think he came to the realization, this may be it. And I think that I saw that in the depression set in. And he was lackluster, not as challenging, but he did have a victory with me that gave him some pause to believe maybe he took advantage of part of the system. I had him so locked up that he wasn't going anywhere. He not only was in a secure jail cell, but I had him in a cell that we had lined with armor plate steel in sheets that were welded in terms of the seams, floor, walls, ceiling. There was no light fixture that he could remove like he did in Colorado, where he took down the light fixture, eventually, slowly getting to where he could remove it, and then knowing on New Year's Eve, when the staff was slight, he took advantage of the moment because he felt that if he could get his head through it, he would eventually get the rest of his body, and he did. Well, I took that away from him because we had the light fixture there, but I had the welder cut strips through it so that there were no screws. There was no attachment. It was all part of the whole steel structure. And then I put extra locks on the door, heavy, impenetrable locks, in addition to the jail key lock. And they were in the hands of several people. In order for him to get out, several people had to be at the door. And that's the way I wanted it, so that he didn't convince one to open the door, because he had a way of convincing people to do what he wanted them to do. Now the fire marshal comes by. He's doing an inspection of my jail, and he sees this door with these locks. They call me in because the fire marshal wants an answer. What's this about? And I said, well, I don't want him to escape. He said, do you realize if you had a fire, Sheriff, if you had a fire in this jail, he may not be able to get out and survive? I said, really? I said, do me a favor, would you? He said, what? Call the local newspaper and tell them that you figured out that Ted Bundy is so secure that even if there were a fire, he wouldn't be able to get out. I said, I want people to know they're safe from this animal, this vulture, this killer, this villain, this deadly creature is confined, and he's escaped for the last time. He took me to court. The judge in the federal court asked me about his allegations of the light was not sufficient, because obviously there was less light coming through the cuts in the steel, that he was not allowed to have legal materials kept in the jail because the books were heavy, and I didn't want him hitting somebody with them when they opened the cell door. And he did rule in favor of Ted Bundy for jail conditions. I wouldn't let him outside, for example, and I had to put him outside 1 hour, 3 days a week. So I took him out to the center of the recreation area, and I told him, don't even think about putting your hands on the fence. Above him, in an enclosed, fenced area, kind of on a pedestal, was one of my officers. In his hands was a shotgun. I said, that man has a shotgun. That man has it loaded. The safety is off and his finger's on the trigger. So don't think about it, Ted. I turned around and walked away. He never enjoyed his time up there. Well, of course, we did a lot of investigation of him. I had him in custody for over 2 years in my detention center, my jail. As a result of having him in detention for so long, we had a lot of time to investigate him. We did find out that things about his relationship with his grandfather, and that his grandfather was abusive, that as a result of some of the relationship with his grandfather, he would experiment with torturing animals as a child, that he was found, at one time, at school masturbating, and things that were tremendously embarrassing to him if someone found out, because he always, it seemed like even into adulthood, had this consciousness or awareness of his difference, that who he was. It's amazing to me that I think he was aware of who he was. He was aware of what he was. He studied himself. He actually had a lot of ability to do introspection. And then he compartmentalized it. He would bring up the moments as I see it from all my discussions with him. And I think he would savor the moments that he had that made him feel that special feeling of whatever it was that we as normal humans can't understand that feeling that comes from the brutalizing of another, a girl, in this case, always young women, as far as we know. I accused him of having an issue with his mother. It was interesting when I first met his mother. She came to Tallahassee and met me in my office, of the sheriff's office. I noticed immediately that she parted her hair down the middle and had always worn her hair that way, apparently. All the girls that he's associated with, every one of them that we think he may have killed, even the 11-year-old that he abducted in Lake City, Florida, and murdered, parted their hair down the middle. I made that distinction. I made that, observation. So I went to his cell one day, talking to him through the port, the opening, and I told him, I said, "Ted, I think I know what's going on with you. You've had a problem with your mother because you were born out of wedlock. She withheld who your father was. You've never forgiven her. And that has a lot to do with what you're doing in terms of taking it out on other women." Well, now, whether I was right or not, I don't know, but I wanted to open up a dialogue that really bothered him. And it did. He immediately opened his eyes wide with anger. The position of his lips were just in such a position that you could just see he wanted to kill. If he could, he would have taken me and strangled me for the comments I made. But I wanted to push the limits to see what it was that was going on with him. He immediately started trashing his cell, throwing things about, and he grabbed the shower rod, which was, by the way, welded in place, that held a small curtain, and he ripped it from its position, which meant a lot of power. So he was like the Incredible Hulk at that moment. His piercing eyes, his tensing body, his concentrated mindset, just like the karate individual breaking the concrete blocks. He was ripping steel from steel. I mean, it was really, to me, an interesting moment. I coordinated the trial only for the sorority sister murders. They got moved to Miami because it was believed that everybody in Tallahassee knew what happened with him, and everybody believed pretty much, that he was involved. The justice system in this country certainly wants to give everybody a fair shot at least presenting their case. And miraculously, they came up with some jurors that never heard of him. So, it's a bigger place and people have lots of other interests, and it's a long ways away from here, but I only coordinated issues at the trial. That's all.
On July 24th, 1979, Ted Bundy was found guilty of killing Florida State University students Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman at their sorority house. He was sentenced to death by electric chair.
I can't explain the feeling because, yes, I was elated that there was a conviction, because obviously the centerpiece that convicted him, the only real evidence we had, was the bite impression. And obviously I felt good because I found it. I was the only one at the time there that knew anything about bite impressions. It hadn't been introduced in the court before. We had good lawyers that, presented the bite evidence, and we got it introduced into court. It was used. Dr. Suveron did a tremendous job testifying about forensic odontology and its role and how capable it is of identifying. So yes, when I found out, I was at a Florida sheriff's conference. All the sheriffs in the state of Florida were there. They all, of course, were congratulating me. I was conflicted. Yes, I understood that this was congratulations, but it was no congratulations. These women had suffered. Some suffered and lived, thank God. Others died. How do you celebrate? I mean, I was happy that we had a resolution that he was going to pay the price. Or at least a price. You can't come up with the price. There is no price. Ask any father, ask any mother. There is no price that you can put on their child to know that, it's not satisfaction. It's not even closure. It's another step in the process that we're glad it's done. Certainly, I was happy that at least it was a conviction. But I knew we had challenges ahead of us because it was going to get appealed. We weren't done. But he lost his appeals. And then I went to work with the prison system. And what really just blew him away was when I showed up at death row, where he was confined in a place that was his waiting place to die, which of course he had a hard time confronting. He knew what death was all about, but dying himself is not something I think he contemplated. I was assigned by the Secretary of Corrections to go over, since I knew him better than anybody, and work on all of his complaints. He was lodging one complaint after another complaint after another complaint about the conditions of confinement. I came to a cell, and something just told me it was his, because there was a sheet mounted over the bars, the only one. I said, wouldn't you know it, that's gotta be it. And yes, it was. That was a violation of the rules. The arrogance of this killer. And he didn't care about your rules. It's like I make the rules. I reached inside the bars. I got a hold of that sheet and I yanked it down. And he was facing the back wall doing exercises. He turned around, looked at me with those eyes just like he did that moment in my jail when I confronted him with, I think this is all about your relationship with your mother. His eyes widened, he tensed, I could see his hands, and then he relaxed. And he said, Ken, what are you doing here? He didn't know. I said, Mr. Bundy, you didn't hear? I'm your new keeper. Oh, I couldn't believe I was able to say that to him, because now I wanted him to know. The jig's up. I'm back. He walked forward towards me. He looked up, looked around, brought his eyes up, locked on my eyes, pursed his lips, and he said, Ken, you did a good job. Well, of course, you probably know that we don't know, because it was revealing too much about himself. This is a brilliant man who tested out at genius levels. He was not your average person. He was bright, brilliant, had a mind that was compartmentalized, and they would talk to each other. They knew each other. He was a different person stalking, a different person murdering, a different person on the run, a different person in capture and planning. These were all compartmental aspects of his mind. But what I assessed from my couple of years of intense exposure with him was that these compartments were not foreign. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't mentally ill. He was a vicious killer. And he couldn't live with himself unless he could lock it up in a compartment and bring it out when he needed it. I am confident that he would spend a long time pulling that out of one of those compartments and savoring the moment, savoring the capture of the prey, savoring the killing moment, savoring the enjoyment of what he was doing. I know that sounds depraved, and that's exactly what he was. Very depraved and intelligent, bright, scholarly, charismatic. He was a precise thinker and struck in a way that when he hit, it was like a shark grabbing its prey, taking it away. Or as we have in Florida, gator attacks. Bam, they clamp, they grab, they pull, they take the prey down and kill it underwater. To me, he was those kinds of vicious animals, and I use both of those because they use their teeth to do their clamping. He used his teeth and clamped hard twice to leave a signature. Well, he was evil, but you could not discern that, even if you knew he was evil, because he didn't come across as evil. He came across as brilliant, charismatic, smart, insightful, and he was a good communicator. So you put together the evil with all of those positive traits, and you have a very dangerous person if they want to focus that evil, smart intentions towards others, which he did. And he was capable of commanding the trust of those that were most vulnerable, the young co-eds going to, college, who were perhaps away from home for maybe the first time in their life.
On January 24th, 1989, Theodore Ted Bundy was executed by electric chair in Florida State Prison.
I'm saddened that I had to be involved in this case. I'm saddened that I had to see what I saw. I'm saddened that somebody always has to be running down who committed these murders. I've got 2 daughters that I protect vigorously. They paid a tremendous price through life because of Ted Bundy, because that experience always made me lecture them about everything they do. Every moment that they're out, every moment they're away, every moment they're somewhere. They probably have more of a mental impression of the ability of a Ted Bundy than anybody, because obviously as a father I was protecting them with what I know. But I will say this, if it had to be somebody, I'm glad it was me at that moment, because I did know about bite marks. I did know about forensic odontology, and it wasn't being a used technology in court until that case. Had I not found, recognized, fought for their preservation, and done it in the proper manner, he would not have been convicted of these crimes. So on that count, I'm glad that the most educated serial killer met the most educated sheriff.
We hope you enjoyed this video on serial killer Ted Bundy and his horrific crime spree throughout the United States. For more content on the world's most evil serial killers, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button down below. We're uploading exclusive content each week this year, so make sure to click the notification bell so you don't miss out. Until the next one.